Hello, everyone. This is Rhonda Magee, and I'm so honored and thrilled to be joining you on this journey, looking at compassion as an aspect of bringing wisdom into our everyday lives at this time. Of course, we are coming together at a time when we've all been bearing up with a lot, all of humanity, frankly. On this side of what we hope is an important point of transitioning out of the coronavirus as a worldwide pandemic phenomenon, but we're still, in some sense, not quite out of the water. So as we come together at this time, the theme of beginning again has been really alive for me. And so what I want to share with you are just some of the ways that I have been leaning into my own practices for deepening my ability and capacity to turn toward rather than away from my fellow human beings during this time when, we've all been suffering a lot. And fortunately, I think these practices support us in not only helping us heal and address our own suffering, but actually also, as we all know, these practices certainly are beautiful inner technologies for supporting us in some of the stress and challenge and difficulty that comes with just being alive together. So, in the next 35 minutes or so, I'd like to just share with you first a bit of practice to help us center ourselves. And the practice that I'll offer will invite grounding in awareness of the embodied presence and spirit that we are. And from that place, opening up to a sense of compassion that includes compassion for the self, the will to alleviate our own suffering. And from that place, our practice will shift us into other regarding extension of compassion, so that as we experiment together with this practice, we are infusing ourselves with the spirit and wise action that I think is at least a version or maybe a part of what we who are committed to mindfulness and committed to a way of being in the world that manifests awareness and compassion. What that can look like as a support for interpersonal and collective and systemic engagement with awareness of our common humanity at this time. So if you're willing, I'd invite you to just take a moment with me to allow yourself to assume a posture for a formal meditation. If you're like me, you might be sitting in a chair, and you may have your feet on the floor, but however you're holding yourself, whether in a chair or on a bed, you could happen to be standing at this moment. For the next few minutes, we're going to allow ourselves to sense into the body in this posture and the points of connection between the body and the earth. So if you're seated, we might be bringing our attention to the feet on the floor, but also the buttocks in the chair, perhaps a point of contact between the back and the back of the chair. Again, however you happen to be holding yourself in this moment. The invitation is to allow yourself to rest your attention right on the sensations, those gentle points of connection with the support that exists for you in this moment, through the chair, through the floor, in the safe enough environment that you've chosen for joining with me for the next few minutes. And in all of this, we're sensing into our connection with the earth itself. Just taking a few, perhaps deeper than normal breaths, and allowing your attention to rest on the body, breathing, and sitting in this moment, right here, right now. Gently inviting the calming of the mind, allowing the thoughts to fall away and our attention to rest on the in breath and the out breath, wherever you happen to be at this moment. And just for a little while, seeing if you can keep your attention on those particular objects of awareness, the in breath, the out breath, the body breathing. And as you do so, just allowing with each in breath and out breath, with each moment that you are allowing yourself to just focus on these gentle sensations in the body. Noticing how, as we do so again and again, bringing our mind back, building not only that muscle of focus, but inviting a calming and relaxing of the thinking mind. So resting in that calming of mental activity. So from this place of a more centered and relaxed mind, we invite a reflection on what brought you to this teaching moment, what called you to this particular series of conversations, reflections, and practices. So centering the intentionality that you're bringing to your practice in this moment, to your participation in this community of teaching and learning. Why are you here? And perhaps bringing awareness of the quality of the heart, the quality of the heart that you bring to your engagement with your practice in this moment, into your journey into this moment of teaching and learning together. Noticing the quality of the heart. Perhaps appreciating on the next in breath and out breath cycle. Breathing in, noticing what is well within you. And breathing out and relaxing just a little bit more into the sense of your innate goodness, kindness. So, from noticing and appreciating the goodness in your own heart, the intentionality you bring to practice infused with that goodness, the invitation in this moment then is to perhaps inquire as to how it is that your practices have been a support for you as you have been engaging in these times with other people with whom you may find yourself sometimes in conflict, or as you look upon the world and become aware of challenges and problems that we are up against at this time. As we breathe in and out, just notice some of the ways that your practice of awareness and compassion might be or is a support for you as you move and transition your attention from the inner experience of moments like this to listening to another, remembering a time when you've had a conversation that may have been a little bit difficult, or perhaps when you've read something or encountered something on social media, just noticing in the body where we carry some of the stress, those kinds of interactions at this time. Maybe some emotion is coming up, a little bit of sadness, frustration, fatigue, a little bit of perhaps the anxiety that can come with not knowing. And so the invitation now, I've already got one hand over my own heart, would be, if you're willing, maybe placing one hand over your heart. You could experiment with placing both hands over your heart at this moment, or one hand over the heart, one hand over the belly button. And really just inviting this remembering of that goodness in your own heart, the warmth, the care that you bring to your practice, to the will to alleviate suffering that very likely is at the heart of your practice, foundation of it for many of us. So breathing in and out and gently inviting this kind holding of whatever difficulty has come up for you in your memory. So maybe noticing tightness in the shoulders or tension around the temples, sides of the upper facial area, the facial muscles themselves. And you might even rub your hands together and gently now place your hands on places in the body where you are feeling some distress from being alive together with others, sometimes in conflicting points of view, experiences at this time. Gently bringing some loving support as you breathe in and out, right where you might need it in the body, by placing the hand in a particular point where Just resting your hand might bring a little bit of ease. And as you breathe in and out in this posture, if you're willing, you might also call forth the image of a place or a person around whom you felt nurtured, safe. You felt the experience of love and care. And for this part of the practice, visualization is really important. So, as best you can, really visualize that place or that person. Maybe there are sounds that are coming up for you. It could be a beachside or ocean, or the sounds of beautiful opening in a forest. You might be seeing sunlight filtering in this place that has felt safe for you. It could be a home or around a table with another human being who's been a supporter, friend along the way for you. And now, as you breathe in and out, you're imagining in your mind's eye being in that place, in the presence of that person, maybe seeing the smile across their face, the look in their eyes, imagining you're hearing the sound of their voice and the way it nurtures you. So, as best as possible, we're allowing ourselves then to remember what we know in our bodies about having been loved, having been safe, and the experience of connectedness. So, even if right here, right now, we're not necessarily in that place that we're visualizing, or maybe even not able to access those same particular people that are coming to mind in our lives right now. Maybe we're disconnected in some way from them. But to know that we have this in our bodies, to know that we have the sense of inner refuge in our bodies, and can in these visualization practices remember what our bodies already know about how to be at ease and at peace in the world. So, from this place, maybe now noticing any way in which the body is settling in and resting and feeling some of the impact of this visualization practice, maybe a shift into a sense of greater calm, maybe some warmth in the heart, in the body, whatever it is for you. Maybe notice, if you can, one way in which you are positively being impacted by this practice already, just sitting, perhaps the visualization, perhaps the sound of my voice here with you. And just breathing in and breathing out. And imagine allowing whatever good feeling, maybe warmth, light that you're feeling in some way in the body, imagine that expanding and flowing now down toward the feet and back up all the way through the midsection, the heart region, down through each arm, now up again through the shoulders, the neck region, the head, and once again, perhaps up over the crown of the head, now the back of the back through the down past the shoulders, lower and upper torso, legs, and now back to the earth. And so, really allowing ourselves to be infused with warmth, really the sense of love that is in our bodies, the sense of safety that we know from having experienced it in the world. Maybe not as often as we like, but we know we have experienced it. We can call on that experience right here, right now. So, from this place of self nurture, self care, kindness, and compassion, the invitation is to imagine exuding all that is gathering in you now, the energy of and light of compassion. Imagine just allowing that to flow forth from your body. Imagine extending it to all those who are near and far, perhaps in the building where you're sitting right now. Imagine extending, if there are others there, this sense of compassion flowing outward from your body, beyond the walls of where you are, to all those in the vicinity, in your neighborhood, in the community where you are. And just imagine that without much effort, the love, the care, the will to alleviate suffering that exists in your own being and that you carry for yourself is something that you could and are extending to others right here, right now, and that you might extend to others with whom you might be in contact in your life today, tomorrow, this week, in the foreseeable future, and beyond. Extending the light, extending the wish for well being and ease from your heart through your own full body and outward to all those who might be in need of such support at this time. In a few minutes, I'll bring this meditation to a close and I'll ring a bell. And the invitation is to see if there is perhaps a word or a phrase or an image that has come up for you or that might come up now as some way in which you have been impacted by this meditation, some way in which you might imagine a thread extending from this meditation into the rest of the journey of this day, evening, moment in your life and beyond. Thank you for your practice. So, just in the remaining few minutes, I'd like to just share just a little bit about how the work that I've been involved in over the years to bring awareness and compassion practice into the spaces and places where we really come together to do some of the most difficult work that we can encounter in our lives. As many of you may know, I'm a law professor by day, if you will, and I've been for the last more than 20 years exploring first in sort of stealth in non obvious ways, and gradually more explicitly how to bring these practices to bear in the work I do with lawyers, law students, um, social activists, and then beyond that circle, where I work as a law professor at the University of San Francisco, into the broader network of people who are bringing awareness and compassion and other contemplative practices into our work in academia, in higher education where I am, but in education beyond that. And so now broadening my network from those in law and social activism to those who are in academia and in education more generally. I have been really working with and benefited by uh, an examination and study of the research and the many different ways that applying the science of mindfulness right where we need it in these efforts to make the world a better place, to change public policy, um, whether it be about immigration policy or criminal law or how we enhance and strengthen democratic systems. Bringing these awareness and compassion practices into that difficult, secular, engaged work. Some of us call it engaged mindfulness. Um, this is, for me, really where, in a way, the rubber meets the road, where we get to really see how it is that our practices have been really deepening our ability, not just to be in a place of calm and ease that can help alleviate our own stress, which is really important, but really we're talking about wisdom in the world, wisdom in action. And so for me, it's been more than 20 years in working with folks in law. And then more broadly, I've worked as the chair of the board in the past of the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society, where we shepherded a network of people in higher education who were bringing these practices in disciplines as far reaching as, of course, law, but, physics on the one hand, social work, English, environmental sciences. And that work has really just been this beautiful opportunity to really look at how these practices are really beautiful, I call them inner infrastructure for these inward, personal commitments that we make to bring deeper awareness and a commitment to an ethical way of being into the choices that we make about how we relate to all that arises in our lives. So there's these personal commitments, and sometimes I use the phrase personal justice to describe those personal commitments. But much more than that, the interpersonal commitments, the way in which our personal practices, the inner work, if you will, profoundly supports us in the external work of, dealing with policies and practices that we didn't create, that we believe and we might be able to see and have on good authority. We know some of these practices and policies might be causing harm, whether we be brokenhearted about, refugee policies that are impacting whether and to what extent people can become a part of our American, US based political community who are trying to escape circumstances around the world, not of their own making, that are causing them to not be able to thrive, or their children or loved ones not to be able to thrive. So we might be particularly concerned about immigration and the circumstances at the border. We might be really concerned about racial injustice at this time, as so many of us have become more aware of the ongoing legacies of our histories of racism and other forms of othering that have gotten in the way of us making the most of the opportunities presented by multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy to make manifest a world in which we can all thrive and have a sense of belonging. So when we come together in recognition that we live in a world, and as much as we practice and seek to navigate this world through the wisdom of our own commitment to choosing wisely and behaving in a way that is grounded in our values, we know that being embodied and living in a world means that we're going to be encountering all kinds of dynamic social forms of challenge, difficulty, oppression, even that bring us great sadness, sometimes great despair. And the more that we realize our radical interconnectedness, which if we didn't already know this through our practice, we certainly have been reminded of this, as you all know, and have been reflecting on, no doubt, by the period that we've been in our efforts to respond, to adapt, and overcome the coronavirus. But that is just one of the many different ways we're reminded of in this time of our radical interconnectedness, if we're willing to see it. The climate change and climate distress that many of us are experiencing in our areas where we live on the planet are just another reminder. And so it is from this place of, in my own personal journey, I come to you from San Francisco, but I was raised in the United States, in North Carolina and Virginia, in a part of the country which has a really deep and profound set of histories that reminds us always that that those histories are still alive in us and still, constantly giving rise to ways of being that means some people suffer from, the pain of racism, the pain of microaggressions, not being met with compassion as often as we might like to be. And also, even more so, even more challenging for us to get our heads around, even when it looks like on the surface, people are being met with, maybe enough kindness, some niceness, maybe not overt discrimination. If we're willing to see it, we know that we're in systems that mean that some people are literally more vulnerable to poverty and impoverishment, to unemployment, right? Whenever our economy suffers any kind of downturn, to health disparities, again, that we saw unveiled very vividly for us in the coronavirus pandemic. So as we look at our world, we can often see multiple interlocking pandemics, one place or another, whether it be about race, climate, or vulnerability to health disparities. How we engage with all of those things is never easy. And so if we can bring this sense of the kind of steadfastness in the book that I wrote, The Inner Work of Racial Justice, Healing Ourselves and Strengthening Our Communities Through Mindfulness, I talk about some of the foundations of what I call color insight. That is a term for how it is that these practices can really help us turn toward rather than away from dealing with issues of race and racism, as one example. We need foundations, I think, in these inner practices to help us regulate our emotions, to help us stay with the hard feelings, the difficult emotions, the grief that can come with really looking at the pain and suffering that racism has caused, for example, that sexism causes and racism cause as they intersect in people's lives like my own. Really creating space for being with the stories that we carry that reveal that when we talk about these things, they're not just about history, they're showing up in our lives right now. Listening to and reading about, studying, learning, being open to news items that underscore that these themes that I'm talking about. This is difficult, and we know this. And because it's so difficult, often in ways that are somewhat understandable, we can be tempted to pull away, to deny even, right? To just kind of avoid dealing with in some way or another. If we're willing to see it, we might notice within ourselves different conditionings, habits, patterns we have for turning away from rather than toward these difficult dynamics in the social world and realm. I believe that mindfulness is really here, actually, for this, for deepening our capacity, not just to feel a little bit more safety and buffering from the distresses that we might face as individuals in the world. But it's really about more than that. Again, the traditional teachings tell us this wherever we look. The stories, for example, if I may just say from the Buddhist tradition, there is the story of the Buddha's, one of his disciples asking this great teacher that we know of as the Buddha, whether or not being well with others, and I'm paraphrasing here, this way of being in relationship with others and in communities in which we make real our commitments to being non-harming, right? To living in ways that minimize suffering, being in communities and just seeing how we're doing, getting feedback from others about ways that maybe we think we're navigating the world in a way that's non-harming, but someone is feeling something that's impacting them and giving us feedback. Being open to that, being open to learning, being willing to change and to keep coming back is never easy. And yet, being in that kind of community, Ananda, the Buddha's disciple, asked, this being in communities of practice with each other, this is half of the holy life, is it not? And the Buddha reportedly responded, Ananda, it's not half of the holy life, if you will, or we could call it the mindful life, the way. It's all of it. So, as I bring these reflections to a close, I just really want to support you in whatever way you might, because again, there's so many ways we might do this, in deepening your commitment to leaning into these practices and offering them silently, sometimes explicitly, opening in others, depending on our roles and the places and spaces where we find ourselves. But leaning into our practices and offering them as support for opening up the aperture to multiple complex reality and staying in it with each other. We need each other from our places of real and perceived difference way more than we ever thought we did. We are given to believe sometimes that if we can just take care of ourselves, get ourselves right, make sure our loved ones are, good enough, we're going to be okay. But more and more, I think the deepest wisdom of our times is the wisdom that underscores that in this moment, we cannot really heal, we cannot really thrive nor flourish for long without attending to the ways that we have set up our lives and organized our communities, our institutions, the work that we do, without attending to the needs of those marginalized and disadvantaged other human beings in our midst. So, one acronym that I've developed over this particular year, and not offered it very much yet, but I'll be offering it here to you as a support, as a takeaway, a kind of a micro reminder, if you will, of what these reflections were meant to offer. I'm going to use the acronym of LOVE, LOVE, because for me, a kind of loving kindness, a public facing, non transactional, um, non harming kind of love and care is what justice looks like in public. As Martin Luther King has said, as Cornel West says, right? So as I speak to this as a way of thinking about what these practices might enliven and might offer to the world, I know I am in good company because many wisdom teachers have known that ultimately we're talking about bringing more love into the world, starting with ourselves and expanding that. So the acronym LOVE, L, as a beginning of an interpersonal practice. The L is for listening, and whether we're listening to those messages in ourselves that tell us, oh, we might be tempted to judge, to shut down in relationship to another human being whose lives and experiences and maybe way of communicating is different from ours. Inviting that listening inquiry, starting with what signs and what symptoms and sensations we might notice in the body. Listening to the voice inside that's telling us we're starting to judge or that's giving us a story about why we don't need to listen to some other person. Listening also then to the other, right? So the L is really about inviting the spirit of practice and inquiry to how we listen to ourselves and to others in these socially sort of divided and often polarized times. So from the L, deepening our commitment to mindful and compassionate listening to ourselves and to the so-called other. O, opening up to the sense of belonging that we might be feeling for our own selves. Yes, which is sometimes we struggle to feel, but opening to, as I hope this practice session helped invite as well, the sense of belonging right here on the earth as we breathe in and out and extending that, the sense of opening LO, right, in our love acronym, opening to the sense that the so called other belongs here too. And how can we meet each other then on a bridge of connection, despite our real and perceived differences? So from L and O to V, venturing then, taking a risk to be vulnerable. Another way of thinking about that V in respect to how we connect and relate to another person. We might share some of what we're struggling with as we seek to listen and to be present to the perspective of another person. We might name that it's hard for us to take this in. We might share some of why that's so. Again, how we venture forth with considered or caring vulnerability may look different in one place or another. But the invitation is to explore how these practices support us, not only in finding our ground, but actually being willing to cede some of that. Let some of it go because we know that ultimately despite feeling in a moment a little bit uncertain, we have the ground of support of these practices deep within us. And then the last letter in the love acronym, E. This I just offer as a support for exploration, right? And seeing our journey, our mindful way of being wise in the world, as one of being curious, being willing to explore, and being willing to engage with the so called other in our midst, whether it be another person, another culture, another background different from ours, from a place of just being willing to learn, to grow, to connect. So, in closing, and I offer this love acronym as a support for interpersonal practice. Play with it, see how it works for you. And above all else, know that the love acronym is meant very purposefully to underscore that for me and for many of us on this journey, awareness practices of compassion, mindfulness are all about finding ways to make love more possible in this world, where again, everything actually is connected. And where, if we're open to it, through our willingness to be well with each other, we can heal the separations, bring peace, and do justice in the time that we have. Thank you so much for your practice. And thank you so much for being with us here on this journey of learning and growing. Be well.